Chapter 5. Switzerland. I sat in my car, eyes fixed on the small road leading out of La Push. Time seemed to stand still. If she knew what she was doing to me, surely Bella wouldn't have pulled such a ridiculous stunt. Alice had told me it must have been a snap decision, in order for her to have disappeared so quickly. She wasn't thinking about me, and all the times I had warned her of the danger. She hadn't thought about how every moment I couldn't know whether or not she was safe ate away at my sanity. She left on a whim. She left to be with him. Although I tried to deny it, in that moment I realized I was in fact feeling the unsettling twinges of jealousy. I had been trying to convince myself the only reason I didn't want her visiting La Push was for her safety, and of course that was my primary concern. But as the seconds ticked by, I had to admit, at least to myself, that there was another emotion toying with me. Perhaps Bella didn't understand the full extent to which it tormented me when she went where I couldn't protect her, but I was certain she had a vague idea, and in the end, her running away at the first opportunity made me wonder what kind of pull Jacob had over her. How desperately did she want to be with him, that she could so callously cast my feelings aside and put me through this misery? The longer I sat, the harder it was to remember why it was necessary for me to simply wait. The sun blazing overhead was a fortunate reminder that waiting in the car was my only real option. If it had been nighttime, it would have been all too easy to convince myself that I could remain hidden, run to her, and watch from a distance, knowing I was close enough to intervene should it become necessary. With each minute that passed, I grew more panicked, and eventually I began foolishly bargaining with myself. If she's not back by the time the sun sets, I'm going to find her, treaty or not. Such a dangerous place for my mind to go, and it was getting worse with every minute. I could feel my resolve wavering as I stared at the empty road, helpless. Why wait until sundown? It's not like I have anything to hide. The wolves know what I am. If she's not back in an hour, I'm going after her. Thankfully, as my foot twitched towards the gas pedal, I heard the familiar roar of Bella's engine. The relief that washed over me as she came into view trumped any feelings of jealousy that had managed to creep in. All that mattered was that she was safe. She had always made it clear how aware of my presence she was, so admittedly, I was expecting her to see me right away and pull over. I was dumbfounded when her truck turned onto the road leading back to Forks, and I suddenly wondered if she had seen me and chosen not to stop. I knew that my protective nature and what she would consider unwarranted worry often frustrated her. Although I didn't want to believe it, the unfalteringly steady speed she maintained all the way back into town only made me feel more certain she was avoiding me. I stared into her rearview mirror, wishing she would glance back at me. I longed to see her eyes, needing to get some idea of what she was thinking and feeling. Frustrated yet again by her ever-silent mind, it felt cruel for her to keep her gaze from me as well. Her eyes were often the only window I had into her thoughts, and she was keeping that window closed to me in these of all moments. Her truck passed the turnoff to her house without slowing, and for a moment I wondered if she was headed towards my house. A few blocks later, she pulled up next to the curb in front of a house I didn't recognize. Bella had been talking about her plans to help Angela with graduation announcements, so I assumed it was the Weber residence. As I drove past her parked truck, I tried unsuccessfully to convince myself she was merely keeping a promise to a friend, rather than purposely putting off talking to me. Still, as her eyes stared stubbornly downward, I couldn't help but feel her avoidance. It took everything in me to keep driving, but now that I knew her safety was no longer a concern, I knew I didn't have the right to force her company. I would check in with Alice, though of course she would already know Bella was safely back over the line. Then I would wait for her to come home. If Bella asked me to leave, I would comply, but I hoped that being back within the comfort of her home, she would be willing to listen with an open mind, and she would finally understand why I couldn't allow her safety to be put at risk again. Even I didn't believe it could ever be that simple. I stood in the growing darkness of her room for what seemed like hours. I lost track of time, though I noticed the sun was beginning to set by the time I heard her truck roar to a stop outside. I forced myself not to listen to her conversation with Charlie, though somehow Jacob's name managed to pierce through my determined wall. My teeth clenched as the earlier feelings of jealousy once again took hold. It was ridiculous, and I hated myself for allowing such a juvenile response, yet I couldn't stop the train of thought. Why, if she was as happy with me as she said she was, couldn't she seem to let him go? Though I had been worried Bella would be the irrational one, the longer I waited for her to come upstairs, the less rational my own thoughts became. The realization of what I had almost done because of her rash decision came crashing in on me, and by the time Bella finally entered her room and looked me in the eye, it was all I could think about. She didn't take my concern seriously. She had chosen her own desire to visit Jacob over listening to my pleas against it, and it had nearly made me break the treaty my family had spent decades upholding. "Hi," she whispered, and amid my staggering, racing thoughts, I couldn't find my voice to answer her. "So, I'm still alive," she continued, and I felt a growl boiling up at her attempt to be nonchalant. "No harm done," she added, shrugging casually. Unfortunately, the moment she spoke the words, my overactive imagination pictured all the harm that could have been done. My eyes shut tightly, and I watched my worst fears behind my eyelids. "Bella," I said, desperate to find my way out of the nightmare and back into the present. "Do you have any idea how close I came to crossing the line today, to breaking the treaty and coming after you? Do you know what that would have meant?" I heard her take in a sharp breath, and I forced my gaze upon her again. "You can't," she gasped, her eyes panicked. "Edward, they'd use any excuse for a fight. They'd love that. You can't ever break the rules." "Maybe they aren't the only ones who would enjoy a fight," I spat, suddenly bombarded with images of finally getting to show those monsters what they were really up against. They had no idea. If Jacob or any of those cretins he called friends ever caused her any harm. "Don't you start," she said, breaking me from my thoughts. "You made the treaty, you stick to it." "If he had hurt you," I started, but she wasn't in any mood to hear it, and honestly, I didn't really want to think about it any more myself. "Enough. There's nothing to worry about. Jacob isn't dangerous." "Bella," I said, rolling my eyes at her absurdity. She had no concept of danger when it came to her life. Countless afternoons spent in a house full of vampires, hunted by one who wants revenge, gallivanting with werewolves. Just another day, nothing to worry about. "You aren't exactly the best judge of what is or isn't dangerous," I added dryly. "I know I don't have to worry about Jake, and neither do you." I felt my jaw tighten at the finality of her statement. It felt like it would never end. She was determined that there was no danger in her spending time with him, and she wasn't going to stop trying to convince me. Whether it was simply because she wanted to be able to spend time with him, or because she generally wanted me to accept him, I couldn't be sure. As Bella eyed me cautiously from across the room, I realized neither one of us had made any motion to move toward each other. Normally she was in my arms within seconds of closing her door, and I suddenly felt pain, a longing, deep inside, at the distance between us. It wasn't just physical distance either, but the chasm that seemed to have opened between us from the argument that appeared to have no solution. As if feeling the distance as implicitly as I did at that moment, Bella began walking toward me, her eyes never leaving mine. Without a word, she pulled me into her embrace. It spoke volumes how much the day had distressed me, that I didn't immediately return the gesture, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I wondered if I would hold her too tightly, hurt her inadvertently from my desire to never let go. The last rays of sun were pouring through her window, casting an ethereal glow that almost started to ease my concerns. In the sanctuary of her room, it was easier to push my fears aside. Still, the tighter she held me, the more I was reminded of my role as her protector. Why couldn't she let me play my part? I wished I could make her understand that when she took herself to where I could no longer watch over her, I was helpless and without purpose. "I'm sorry I made you anxious," she said softly. I felt my tension ease slightly with the sincerity of her tone. No longer able to stand the emptiness I felt at not having her in my arms, I pulled her close and let myself breathe her in. Anxious is a bit of an understatement. It was a very long day.